The Ancient City. A study on the religion, laws, and institutions of Greece and Rome.
Numa Denis Fustel De Coulanges.
Book 2nd, The Family. Chapter 3, Continuity of the Family. Celibacy forbidden. Divorce in case of sterility. Inequality between the son and daughter.
The belief relative to the dead, and to the worship that was due them, founded the ancient family, and gave it the greater part of its rules. We have seen above that man, after death, was reputed a happy and divine being, but on the condition that the living continued to offer him the funeral repasts. If these offerings ceased, the dead ancestor fell to the rank of an unhappy and malevolent demon. For when these ancient generations began to picture a future life to themselves, they had not dreamed of rewards and punishments. They imagined that the happiness of the dead depended not upon the life led in this state of existence, but upon the way in which their descendants treated them. Every father, therefore, expected of his posterity that series of funeral repasts which was to assure to his mones repose and happiness. This opinion was the fundamental principle of domestic law among the ancients. From it followed, in the first place, this rule, that every family must perpetuate itself forever. It was necessary to the dead that the descendants should not die out. In the tomb where they lived, this was the only inquietude which they experienced. Their only thought, their only interest, was, that there should be a man of their blood to carry them offerings at the tomb. The Hindu, too, believed that the dead repeated continually,
"May there be born in our line sons who shall bring us rice, milk, and honey."
The Hindu also had this saying.
The extinction of a family causes the ruin of the religion of this family. The ancestors, deprived of the offering of cakes, fall into the abode of the unhappy.
The men of Italy and Greece long held to the same notions. If they have not left us in their writings an opinion so clearly expressed as in the old books of the East, their laws, at least, remain to attest their ancient opinions. At Athens the law made it the duty of the first magistrate of the city to see that no family should become extinct. In the same way, the Roman law made provision that no family should fail and become extinct. We read in the discourse of an Athenian orator,
"There is no man who, knowing that he must die, is so careless about himself as to wish to leave his family without descendants, for then there would be no one to render him that worship that is due to the dead."
Every one, therefore, had an interest in leaving a son after him, convinced that his immortal happiness depended upon it. It was even a duty towards those ancestors whose happiness could last no longer than the family lasted. The laws of Manu call the oldest son
the one who is begotten for the accomplishment of a duty.
Here we touch upon one of the most remarkable characteristics of the ancient family. The religion that had founded it required that it should never perish. When a family becomes extinct, a worship dies out. We must take these families at a time before the belief had yet been altered. Each one of them possessed a religion and gods, a precious trust, over which it was required to watch. The greatest misfortune that its piety had to fear, was that its line of descendants might cease and come to an end, for then its religion would disappear from the earth, its fire would be extinguished, and the whole series of its dead would fall into oblivion and eternal misery. The great interest of human life was to continue the descent, in order to continue the worship. In view of these opinions, celibacy was a grave impiety and a misfortune, an impiety, because one who did not marry put the happiness of the mones of the family in peril, a misfortune, because he himself would receive no worship after his death, and could not know what the mones enjoyed. Both for himself and for his ancestors it was a sort of damnation. We can easily believe that in the absence of laws such a belief would long be sufficient to prevent celibacy. But it appears, moreover, that, as soon as there were laws, they pronounced celibacy to be wrong, and a punishable offense. Dionysius of Halicarnassus, who had searched the ancient annals of Rome, asserts that he had seen an old law which required young people to marry. Cicero's treatise on the laws, a treatise which almost always reproduces, under a philosophic form, the ancient laws of Rome, contains a law which forbids celibacy. At Sparta, the legislation of Lycurgus deprived the man who did not marry of all the rights of citizenship. We know from many anecdotes, that when celibacy ceased to be forbidden by laws, usage still forbade it. Finally, it appears from a passage of Pollux, that in many Greek cities the law punished celibacy as a crime. This was in accordance with the ancient belief: man did not belong to himself, he belonged to the family. He was one member in a series, and the series must not stop with him. He was not born by chance, he had been introduced into life that he might continue a worship. He must not give up life till he is sure that this worship will be continued after him. But to beget a son is not sufficient. The son who is to perpetuate the domestic religion must be the fruit of a religious marriage. The bastard, the natural son, he whom the Greeks called
Nothos.
and the Romans
Spurius.
could not perform the part which religion assigned to the son. In fact, the tie of blood did not of itself alone constitute the family, the tie of a common worship had to be added. Now, the son born of a woman who had not been associated in the worship of the husband by the ceremony of marriage could not himself take any part in the worship. He had no right to offer the funeral repast, and the family was not perpetuated for him. We shall see, farther on, that for the same reason he had not the right of inheritance. Marriage, then, was obligatory. Its aim was not pleasure, its principal object was not the union of two beings who were pleased with each other, and who wished to go united through the pleasures and the trials of life. The effect of marriage, in the eyes of religion and of the laws, was the union of two beings in the same domestic worship, in order to produce from them a third who would be qualified to continue the worship. We see this plainly by the sacramental formula that was pronounced in the act of marriage.
Ducere uxorem liberum quaerendorum causa.
To lead a wife, to wed, for the sake of getting children.
Was the Roman expression.
Paidon ep arotognesion.
For the sowing of legitimate children.
Was the Greek. This marriage having been contracted only to perpetuate the family, it seemed just that it should be broken if the wife was sterile. The right of divorce, in this case, always existed among the ancients. It is even possible that divorce was an obligation. In India, religion proscribed that the sterile woman should be replaced by another at the end of 8 years. That the duty was the same in Greece and Rome, there is no formal text to prove. Still, Herodotus mentions 2 kings of Sparta who were constrained to repudiate their wives on account of sterility. As to Rome, every one knows the history of Carvilius Ruga, whose divorce is the first of which the Roman annals make mention.
Carvilius Ruga,
Says Aulus Gellius.
a man of rank, separated from his wife by divorce because he could not have children by her. He loved her tenderly, and had no reason to complain of her conduct, but he sacrificed his love to the sanctity of his oath, because he had sworn, in the formula of marriage, that he took her to wife in order to have children.
Religion demanded that the family should never become extinct, all affection and all natural right had to give way before this absolute rule. If the sterility of a marriage was due to the husband, it was no less necessary that the family should be continued. In that case, a brother or some other relative of the husband had to be substituted in his place. The child born of such a connection was held to be the son of the husband, and continued his worship. Such were the rules among the ancient Hindus. We find them again in the laws of Athens, and in those of Sparta. So powerful was the empire of this religion. So much did religious duty surpass all others. For a still stronger reason, ancient laws prescribed the marriage of the widow, when she had had no children, with the nearest relative of her husband. The son born of such a union was reputed to be the son of the deceased. The birth of a daughter did not fulfill the object of the marriage. Indeed, the daughter could not continue the worship, for the reason that on the day of her marriage she renounced the family and worship of her father, and belonged to the family and religion of her husband. The family, like the worship, was continued only by the males, a capital fact, the consequences of which we shall see farther on. It was, therefore, the son who was looked for, and who was necessary, he it was whom the family, the ancestors, and the sacred fire demanded.
Through him,
According to the old laws of the Hindus,
a father pays the debt due to the manes of his ancestors, and assures immortality to himself.
This son was not less precious in the eyes of the Greeks, for later he was to perform the sacrifices, offer the funeral repast, and preserve by his worship the domestic religion. In accordance with this idea, old Aeschylus calls the son the savior of the paternal hearth. The entrance of this son into the family was signalized by a religious act. First, he had to be accepted by the father, who, as master and guardian of the hearth, and as a representative of his ancestors, had to decide whether the newcomer was or was not of the family. Birth formed only the physical bond, the declaration of the father formed the religious and moral bond. This formality was equally obligatory in Greece, in Rome, and in India. A sort of initiation was also required for the son, as we have seen it was for the daughter. This took place a short time after birth, the 9th day at Rome, the 10th in Greece, the 10th or 12th in India. On that day the father assembled the family, assembled witnesses, and offered a sacrifice to his fire. The child was presented to the domestic gods, a female carried him in her arms, and ran, carrying him, several times round the sacred fire. This ceremony had a double object: first, to purify the infant, that is to say, to free him from the stain which the ancients supposed he had contracted by the mere fact of gestation, and, second, to initiate him into the domestic worship. From this moment the infant was admitted into this sort of sacred society or small church that was called the family. He possessed its religion, he practiced its rites, he was qualified to repeat its prayers, he honored its ancestors, and at a later period he would himself become an honored ancestor.